That's great. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Dominic. Um, we've got a bit of time for questions and some discussion. It's going to be interesting to see how we can use the Zoom platform to have this discussion. There are two tools, like I said, there's the Q&A button that you have, if you want, you can type questions in there. There's also a functionality that allows you to raise your hand, and one of us, or probably Ryan, will then enable your microphone if you want to ask the question directly. Yeah, I'd like to open the floor, as it were, and please ask questions to our presenters. And this was bound to happen, of course. Nobody's asking a question. Should we start with some questions that have already been asked on the Q&A, which are a little bit more technical than the issues that Dominic has raised. But if we can start with those, the issues are around exporting from TMS and how the TMS works with other systems. Jay, are you still online? Yeah. Would you like to give a quick comment about that?
Yeah. So the answer right now is that the data can be exported basically in like XML or JSON format, and then be used by other systems. We're interested in making it more accessible in a standard way, such as has been described, using CDOC CRM. But right now, it's mainly exportable through XML or JSON or standard data format.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question by Austin. What data is currently being collected by Census in museum spaces, and how does that fit into the model? And that's for Dennis, is it?
If that is in fact a question for me, I'll say that there are probably others on the call who can speak to the details more effectively than I can. But from the perspective of Disco and Arches, we see sensors as really just another contributor to the information that you would like to collect about an object. So essentially digital information, interesting digital information in that it's often time series data, but this is exactly the kind of information that Disco is designed to manage and to display and to query.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. There's another question that has come up. Yeah, I mean, I think that somebody's, Amanda is insisting on the connection between the conservation module of TMS with other CMSs that people use in museums. So if somebody wanted to adopt Conservation Studio, but does it play well with other museum management systems, collection management systems?
Right. I'm sure the answer I'm going to give is not acceptable, basically, but it is a fully integrated system with our TMS platform. It's not that we're not open to supporting another CMS, for sure. It is integrated in so many places, like constituents, as I mentioned, or exhibitions and loans, locations, media, all kinds of other areas that are within TMS. So currently I would have to say, no, it's not something that is that works with another CMS system.
We do have one client which is using Conservation Studio for their main museum collections. In order to keep their conservation across museum and library systems consistent, they are doing an integration. So basically, to use conservation with another system, you'd be doing, in effect, an integration so that you have the object information. You lose some of the advantages of having the integrated system, but you do get the flexibility that I showed you of being able to track conservation information. So in some ways, that would become almost a standalone conservation documentation system potentially linked through linked open data and those kinds of things as well. But it doesn't have the full integration potential of when the two are worked together.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, sorry, Amanda has come back. Sorry, I'm not asking whether Conservation Studio can be integrated into another system. What I'm asking is, what about the bigger project of linked conservation data from existing conservation module in other products? Oh yes, so I think the point she's making here is on whether we can use linked data to connect the different systems and how perhaps TMS would I mean, I suspect one of the reasons why you're interested in linked data is to be able to connect with conservation data from other systems through a linked data approach.
Okay, I think I understand. So that is what we are interested in doing, is being able to share conservation data amongst, for example, one use case that we've run into is related to institutions participating in multi-venue exhibitions where there's hundreds of objects sometimes, that, you know, there's condition reports and condition reports upon leaving and arriving at different venues, and being able to transfer that data electronically, but also doing it in a standard way so that it could be used by multiple systems, not just by TMS. And currently, a lot of data right now are sent through like PDFs or Word documents or even paper, assigned paper documents. So that is something that we are aiming for. We don't have that right now, but that is something we are aiming for.
I think we also have to be realistic in thinking about the order that we do things, because in some ways, one of the prerequisites to be able to take full advantage of linked open data is to have enough volume of the terminology and concepts and activities and fields that we're using in common to really be able to share. So at a certain level, the technology is there to do it, but in some ways, I think one of the practical things that excite me about this project, in some ways we're not ready because we haven't yet determined all of the points of sharing and all of the points of shared vocabularies and terminologies. So it's kind of a balance of needing to do that technical mapping in order to be able to do it on a scale that's actually sharing a volume of relevant information.
I hope we're answering the question, the correct question.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. While people are typing their questions in the Q&A box, I wanted to ask something to Dennis and Rob, perhaps Rob more than Dennis. But because we've talked about the CRM as a model to express all these observations and records that we've got, and linked art is producing yet a model. It would be useful, I think, to explain a little bit, Rob, how the linked art model relates to this CRM model.
Yes, of course, and I apologize for not being clear about that in the slides. So linked art doesn't introduce, I can't say any, it introduces a couple of new features. but by and large, it is a profile of the Cydoc CRM model. So one of the benefits of the CRM model is that it's very flexible, and you can use it to say anything that you want. One of the difficulties of that is that everyone uses it in different ways to say whatever it is that they want to say. So that makes building applications and that consume the data, or even implementations of the system, much more complicated than necessary. So linked art then is an attempt to find the commonly used patterns that make it easy to work with the more complex model. So the things that we add on top of CRM are very much at the edges of the model, and we, as you know, being part of the SIG, we engage with the special interest group in ICOM, the Cydoc CRM SIG. That is the group responsible for defining the CRM model to see where we can improve the underlying system rather than diverging from it. So, for example, at the last meeting, we all discussed, or the previous meeting, I should say, we discussed an issue about names being linguistic and not having a good pattern for saying that a particular name is in a language. And we, as a community, decided that that was an important use case and added, very simply, a way to manage that at the core ontology level. So we see linked art not as trying to define an ontology, but instead to work across communities and be the bridge between the use cases and the art and museum stakeholders and the technical community that is defining the core model, such that we can improve the lives of everyone.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob. And in the meantime, we have had a couple of more questions. This is an anonymous attendee, but I think this question is for Dominic, and it's more on the technical side, Dominic, I'm afraid. But the question is whether ResearchSpace supports various imaging file formats that are common in conservation, such as HD, F5, and DICOM, X-rays, and multispectral, hyperspectral imaging. So I was wondering if, I suspect I know the answer, but I was wondering if you can answer that.
It doesn't, but I suspect that there will be interest in developing. So ResearchSpace is an open source platform, and there are already institutions that are developing under it. So, for example, 2 of the Max Planck institutes are currently using ResearchSpace, and it's being used in some European projects as well. So I think formats are being sort of thought about, and especially in 3D formats are currently being integrated into the system. So I suspect, I mean, these linked data graph systems are relatively easy to attach things, but as I was saying in my presentation, it's not simply about attaching technology, it's about thinking about how this technology works together and what you want to do with it, and how it then flows into a conversation with other conservators or related people. So as I say, a lot of these systems are at their early days, and I suspect Disco and eventually gallery systems, when they get on board with linked data, will start supporting more and more. But at the moment, that those specialist formats aren't supported in ResearchSpace.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dominic. We'll definitely come back to the point you're making about the sort of the more theoretical ideas around linked data and whether the approach is correct. I think it's very interesting points to discuss. Can we perhaps answer quickly a question from Claudia Marinica, who is part of the consortium, of course, and this is a question for Dennis, and on how the data is actually stored in the background in arches as RDF triples, or and whether they are mapped to a conceptual model.
Thanks for the question, Claudia. It's a really good one. Arches, I guess I'll start with the second question first. Arches allows you to develop models, so really conceptual models of things, so objects or activities or people or really kind of whatever you feel is important to represent in your in the platform, and it does it in a very mathematically straightforward way. That is to say, Arches allows you to define conceptual models using graph structure. So we use a graph data model in Arches, and hopefully that's not too technical of a term, but essentially imagine a series of nodes and edges, much like the kinds of graphs that you saw with Dominic's presentation. In the Arches world, each node represents a class in the CRM, and the edges that connect, the lines that connect the nodes, are properties. So it can be built in a visual way. You don't need to do coding. Arches allows you to build these conceptual models, and they're informed really right from the very beginning with core CRM ideas. As far as how Arches actually stores the data, it doesn't in fact store data as RDF triples. It uses a different way of actually managing the actual input of information into the database. Probably the most important thing to know about Arches is that these graph models can be deeply nested, and Arches takes care of indexing the information in a way, in fact, uses a search engine that is dedicated, that Arches dedicates to managing the information. And that search engine we use Elasticsearch. It's quite flexible and allows us to structure the underlying information in quite sophisticated ways. And one of the things it allows us to do is to expose any data in Arches as RDF, essentially as JSON LD is the specific format that we use. So a JSON representation of linked data. Hopefully that's an answer to your question. I apologize to those who are averse to hearing all the technical details, but it's a really important question, and thank you for posing it.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dennis. Since there is no other question coming up in the Q&A box, I think perhaps we should discuss a few ideas that Dominic brought up in his presentation. And I was just thinking that I always thought of linked data as an opportunity to improve legacy data. And legacy data is always a problem if you haven't got, whatever data you got, or the quality of the data, any processing you do on that data inevitably will be affected by that quality. So, but I always was considering linked data as an opportunity to improve that quality. And I was trying to understand, Dominic, whether it is linked data that is the problem, or that is a sort of wider issue with legacy data in heritage organizations. I mean, you were talking a lot about building new graphs as opposed to relying on legacy data. Is that the key? I mean, I'm still trying to understand if the problem you're highlighting is the technical solution, or a more general problem about data and the fact that people need to make more than just rely on legacy data.
Well, I think that a lot of the standards that we still use were invented a long time ago, and they were invented for particular reasons. And so they have a design objective within them, which is different from the design objectives that I think we have today, where we have more sophisticated technology, and we want to do more things with it, and we want to make use of this networked environment in order to communicate more effectively. So I think there is a mindset issue. There is an ingrained issue in terms of the current institutionalized collection management systems and the way that they work. In some respects, it's fine because they were designed for a particular purpose. But if we want to go into this new, if we want to start thinking about how we think online, how we put more of our knowledge online, then we've got to get away from standards that were designed simply to create catalogs and references, because they don't encompass the type of information that would make it worth our while to invest more of our working time into them. So yeah, I think it's always been a problem. So curators here at the British Museum will always say, "Oh, not another system that I have to input yet another set of data into. I have work to do." So the idea about creating more epistemological frameworks above this sort of ontological level is about trying to transfer more of their work into this environment so that they're not duplicating it in different places in different computer systems. And it's useful to them. So the other thing that lots of curators say is, I realize I have to put the data in, but it's not necessarily useful when I'm doing my research. I go to lots of other different resources and sources in order to do my work. And ultimately, I express myself in narrative. And I think what we're trying to do is get away from this very sort of referencey catalog type form and structure of data and get towards a more expressive form, which is determined by those experts in the first place. So they're not being dictated to in terms of the language they use. And what you end up with is potentially the benefits of linked data on ontologies where you can integrate them, but you also have the advantage of supporting people's expressions, language, methodologies, and epistemology. And if you can do that, then you can stop this sort of division between the research I do, which is mostly done off an input system, a catalog system, and you can integrate these things together. But we can't do that with catalog standards. We still have this division between the two things. And I guess that's where we're trying to head towards. We're trying to head towards a much more expressive language of structured data that can address much more complicated ideas and concepts, so that researchers feel that they're actually getting something out of it rather than just putting something into it as a reference.
Thank you. I've just I think Joe wants to come in. Joe, would you like to speak? I think I've activated your microphone now. Or maybe it didn't work.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh yes, we can hear you. Great.
All right. So, sorry, I was looking at the different screen and couldn't see the option to unmute myself. I was just commenting that the whole notion of linked data is quite tricky because it's a question of what are you linking to what. The first practical examples for most people will be as described, as connecting a conservation module to a collections management module or connecting it to a digital imaging module. So it's sort of linking or aggregating systems within a given institution. Some of the more large-scale benefits or sort of opportunities for linking between systems or linking to external standards almost are an additional benefit. If one has worked out how to connect internal systems together within an institution, then connecting them to external systems almost comes free after that if you want to. But I think it's often difficult to concentrate on connecting to external systems first because it causes a lot of IPR issues or problems or concerns. It's an issue to think about. Is what are we actually linking and why and who gains from what and who's asking for what data.
And just added to that, Joe, why aren't we talking about linking people?
Yeah.
Why is it always linking systems and exporting and connecting and putting plug-in? Why isn't it about facilitating a structured data conversation and argument between people and creating networks of people? Why is it always a discussion about connecting machines?
Well, I would say that, I mean, obviously, given your presentation on research space, I'd say that that's generally speaking because of the limitations of the technology. Research space is presenting the opportunity to do that, but that's been extremely difficult beforehand. I mean, we have some degree of connections of people arguing about the edits on, say, Wikipedia, but it's often not sort of complex enough to capture the nuances of people's sort of conversation. So I would say it's a technology problem that hasn't allowed people to be connected, but hopefully that's being solved.
I hope so, and it goes to the question that was originally asked about, does linked data make a difference? In some ways, linked data solves some of these problems about being able to link distributed data, as I was saying in my presentation. But actually, it has a lot of problems as well, and I guess it's still a relatively marginalized technology compared to the establishment of traditional SQL databases. The top 10 databases are still SQL. The web is still powered by SQL databases. And I would say that they're still powered by a mentality that was there originally when we had mainframe computers and the original SQL language in the 1950s, the late 1950s. In some respects, if you read the articles back in the 1950s, people had a much more optimistic view of where data would take, where these databases would take them than they do now. We're very narrow in our approach to databases. But if you look at the articles in the 1950s, humanists were extremely optimistic about what potentially you could do with these databases. It hasn't happened, but SQL mentality is still very much entrenched in linked data thinking.
Well, I'd say, I mean, judging from the questions beforehand about how you get data out of TMS, for instance, we here at the National Gallery, we use TMS. It's one of the systems we use. And a lot of the work that I've done of aggregating systems within the National Gallery is done so by directly querying the SQL tables underneath TMS. So SQL doesn't, or sort of SQL databases don't necessarily limit you from having linked data. It's just some of the newer, shall we say, RDF type structures make it technically easier. But you can technically link spreadsheets together if you really wanted to. It's a bit tedious. But it's about looking at why you're doing it and the efficiency of allowing people to get on with other jobs, really.
I think I agree, but I guess what we're doing in research space is trying to stretch linked data quite away from what it was originally designed for by technologists, because it does have those inherent benefits in it. But what it doesn't have is it doesn't have that expressiveness and that sense that you can make it your own. You have to put up with what you're given. And I think this is where Tim Berners-Lee and the semantic web is going. It's going towards not just distributed linked data, but distributed authoring. And we believe it should go one step further into distributed data design by subject experts themselves. So they design above the ontology where they want to go with expressing the data that they've got.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Sorry,
to do it.
I'm just a little bit conscious of time, and Masha has also shared an image which perhaps I will try to load up and show. But and if we can finish with Masha and her commenting on that image, I'll just try to see if I can.
Excuse me. This is Jay. Can I just make a comment quickly while you're doing that?
Very quickly, yes, thank you.
I appreciate Joe's question about linked data. And one thing I feel that we should also be thinking about as part of this project is conservation data often is not open. There are concerns by conservators of who sees certain data, whether it's scientific analysis or whatever. So it's not necessarily open, but linked data and who has access to it. So even though linked open data kind of implies that it's available out there, accessible by anybody, I think it's something we should also think about, like, well, are conservators okay with that? Or is there another way to make it so that it's somewhat security or permissions based?
Thank you for this. I'm just looking for, sorry, Masha, I will activate your microphone, and then maybe you want to give us a final comment with that image. I think you should be able to speak now.
Yeah, thank you. I just think that we have been discussing at different levels, and we are facing different challenges at different levels. The linked data mostly addressing the original from knowing nothing to become knowing something. And so from data without treating with the linked data themselves, it won't be able to go up to become meaningful information and also become knowledge and come up with wisdom. So this has been a pyramid that have been used for explaining what we are facing, challenges, and where we are addressing the issues. I just thought that, you know, I can hear that we're discussing at different levels. Okay.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Masha. I think I would like to stop the discussion now, but we can obviously carry on, as we will have an email going around to people, so we can carry on the discussion over email.